I wanted to welcome everyone to the Citizen 7 Indy Zoom call featuring Dr. John Licklider, the former CEO of Eli Lilly, and a friend to many on this call, and a person who, through his leadership civically and through his corporate leadership, has had an enormous impact on the state of Indiana and really on our country. So as many of you know, Citizen 7 endeavors to make Indianapolis flourish. Our vision is to bring men of various backgrounds together to unite around different initiatives in the city to heal and to grow the good in Indy. So we have the privilege of hearing from Dr. Licklider to expand our thinking and widen our vision. So we have one of Citizen 7's very own, a longtime colleague of Greg Enos's, Dr. Tim Franson, and he will be introducing Dr. Licklider. So Tim, take it away.
Thanks very much, Don, and good day, colleagues and friends. Delighted to see you all here. And I thought I would begin with a few thoughts apart from what you've already seen in John's very impressive resume. Just a quick thought about, since we're speaking of learning from legends, what is the definition of a legend? And according to Webster Merriam, it's a person or thing that inspires, very fitting, or an important person who's known for doing something or many things very well. And that certainly is John Licklider. Those of us who've had the pleasure and privilege to work with and for John know him to be an exemplar in investing his efforts through time, talent, treasures, and also uniquely with transformative thinking on the many organizations he touched. I know that he shares with all of us the commitment to faith, family, and friends, and he has really gone above and beyond with decades of dedication in the areas of education, healthcare, community enrichment, and so many other things that touch the lives of those with whom he works and those who have been disadvantaged, obviously of great concern to all of us. So it's not my intent to go through that resume. He's clearly been uniquely accomplished in so many fields. And I would just like to lead in to invite John's comments with one other comment, and that is a second definition of legend. A legend is a guide that explains symbols on a map. And I can't think of anyone better suited to help us map our courses of inspiring service to others. So without further ado, our friend, colleague, and very much admired community exemplar, John Licklider.
Well, thanks very much, Tim, and good afternoon, everyone. I was hoping that you would find some form of wordplay in your introduction, and you skillfully accomplished that, Dr. Franson. So thank you very much, and thanks to Greg Enos for inviting me in the first place. I was not aware of Citizen 7, but Greg took the time and to explain to me what you guys are all about, and it didn't take me long to accept his invitation to join you today, and I hope my remarks stimulate your thinking, or at least don't miss the mark. I've been scanning who's tuned in here, and I see a lot of familiar faces. I'd like to say hello in particular to all my former Lilly colleagues. Many years ago, my wife and I purchased a piece of property down here in Brown County where we're living now from Mel Perlman. I think many of you remember Mel, and we're lucky to have some acreage here, and a few years ago built a house, and we're sort of riding out the COVID storm a few counties south of where many of you sit right now, but happy to report that we're doing fine. Well, given that the people on this call, the individuals on this call, are all leaders in our community by definition, I thought I would spend the time I had today talking a little bit about leadership and some characteristics and qualities of leaders, in particular, courage, optimism, and generosity. Before I dive into that, though, I want to just make a few opening remarks, given the extraordinary time that we certainly find ourselves in at the moment. The pandemic that we're all experiencing has really shaken global societies to their core, and I think caused all of us to reassess, at least for me, almost everything in our daily routine, things that I think in many cases we simply took for granted. Yet I believe in maybe a sort of perverse sort of way, the pandemic has also helped to clarify what is essential to some degree and what is not. So, toilet paper, essential. Professional sports, maybe. Flying all over the country for meetings, not, right? Seriously, I believe that some good, maybe much good, can come out of the situation if we choose to reflect a little bit and to examine our own situations. Been thinking a lot about the topic of risk, for example. Risk, or the perception of risk, is a funny thing to begin with. Note this observation that I came across in a recent article in the Financial Times. And this is, I quote, "People tend to be more fearful of risks that are novel or that inspire dread. Thus, they fear nuclear power more than coal, gas, or oil, which kill far more people. They are also warier of risks they cannot control, so they hold airlines to higher standards of safety than their own driving." I thought that was an interesting set of observations. Those of you who are in or have been in corporate roles, I think, know all about something called enterprise risk management, ERM. This sort of came to the fore, I'm guessing, probably 20 years ago, probably brought to us by some consultant. But every large company now engages every year in enterprise risk management, this sort of exercise where you essentially attempt to identify risks and then put interventions or mitigating plans in place to deal with those risks. It can easily become a sort of an esoteric exercise if you're not careful. And I was thinking as I put this talk together, for whatever reason, I was never completely satisfied with what we came up with every year after we completed this exercise at Lilly. And maybe in retrospect, that was a good thing. Now, I guarantee you that if you were to take a look at all the 2x2 matrices generated on this enterprise risk management exercise by all the Fortune 500 companies just last year in 2019. And by 2x2 matrix, I mean the ones that plot the likelihood of a certain risk occurring on one axis and the potential severity of the consequences on another, if you see what I mean. I will almost guarantee you that nowhere on any of those 2x2 matrices would you have found pandemic listed, okay? And yet, in many ways, it was entirely predictable. There have been 6 or 7 precursor events in the last 15 to 20 years that have foreshadowed what we're experiencing now. And in fact, what happened at the beginning of this year was predicted a few years ago by no less an expert on global health than Bill Gates. And I'll come back to Bill Gates in a moment. So the rhetorical question I leave you with in the area of risk is, do you think it's maybe time we think about risk in a different way, in a different context, and maybe use this as an opportunity to reflect on how we've managed risk in the present situation and how we might do it differently in the future? So it could be an opportunity. Now, I said earlier that for many people, the pandemic has sort of laid their lives bare. And so I think it has been an opportunity, if taken, for self-assessment and reflection. Although I'm no longer punching the clock, I've thought a lot about this in the context of business, or for that matter, really any kind of organizational construct, a not-for-profit, for example. Isn't this really a good time for us to re-examine what it is that your business or organization stands for? To maybe dust off the proverbial mission statement and ask, is it still relevant? And if it is, are we putting heart and soul into its accomplishment? In an age where there seems to be so much noise, where there's so much distraction, along with an increasingly rapid pace of change, there's always the temptation to chase the shiny penny. You know, around every corner is something new and exciting and seemingly attractive. And yet history is littered with examples of organizations that have lost their way, that have lost sight of why they exist in the first place and what it is that they had set out to do. So I think as leaders, it's important, maybe now more than ever, to push away distractions and to stay focused. As many of you know, as we went through many years, what I often thought of as through the wilderness at Lilly, around the losses of 4 patents for products that accounted for roughly 40% of our 2009 sales, we kept coming back to our mission, which stood unchanged through that period. And that was to make medicines that enable people to live longer, healthier, and more active lives. That required that we invested more in R&D, even though revenue was falling. And it meant dealing with and living through what you can imagine was a barrage of criticism from multiple constituencies, all of whom had bringing their own ideas of what we should do. But stay the course we did, and I think it's paid off handsomely. Now, does focusing on your mission mean you should stand still and risk extinction? Of course not. You have to constantly reassess how you go about the implementation of your mission, and on rare occasions, maybe even change or modify that mission statement. But I think you also have to be able to muster the discipline necessary to stay the course and to measure progress toward your ultimate goals, which are, of course, reflected in your core purpose. And that really leads me to my final topic, an examination, brief examination of 3 important characteristics of good leaders, what I believe to be 3 important characteristics, amplified in their importance by the present moment in which we live. And those are courage, optimism, and generosity. Many years ago, Sarah, my wife, and I and our 3 children lived in England when I worked for Lilly in the early 1980s at our research center in Earl Wood. And I was watching television one night, and the BBC was interviewing this fellow who later became Sir John Harvey Jones. But at the time, he was the CEO of huge chemical conglomerate, ICI, which the oil shock in the 1970s had brought to its knees. And he'd been come up through the ranks to turn the company around. And turn the company around, he did. He was an unlikely CEO, sort of looked like Vlad the Impaler, long black hair, Fu Manchu, mustache, quite an imposing figure, not exactly out of central casting, but someone that was a huge influence in business in England in the 1980s and 90s, who was later knighted for the good work that he did. So the interviewer was interviewing this man who was already somewhat of a legend and asked this question. that caught my attention. And the question was to John Harvey Jones, what is the essence of leadership? You know, what are the essential characteristics of great leaders? And so, boy, I almost took out my my pen and my notepad. I wanted to catch this for sure, to hear what John Harvey Jones had to say about this. And he was sort of dismissive with his answer. He said, well, that's easy. He said, there's just two things, courage and physical stamina. And I paused and said to myself, wait a minute, that's the essence of leadership, is courage and physical stamina? Well, boys, it took many years and many more hard miles before I realized, hey, the guy's right, okay? On both counts, by the way, and I won't get into physical stamina, but I'll just say enough said for that. I mentioned before some of the Lilly story. It did indeed take courage for us to stay the course during this period difficulty that we faced starting about a decade ago. Were we certain of the outcome? Not for a good while, particularly after we were hit with some pipeline failures early in the period. I remember meeting with a journalist in Germany about that time who asked a question that others here stateside had asked, which was, well, you know, we see what you want to do, but if that fails, what's plan B? I got a kick out of the headline the next day in his newspaper in the business section where they reprinted the interview. The headline with a picture of me below it said, "Ich bin ein Plan A guy." Okay, I'm a Plan A guy. And while you always have to think about a Plan B, we were focused on Plan A because we were as certain as we could be that was the best path for Lilly, and I believe it was. Well, today, sadly, there's a pretty low bar for what amounts to courage. At the present time, it can take courage simply to speak your mind, to dare to stand up or go against what's popular or what's trending or what's seen as politically correct. Yet I believe we must each gather the courage to think independently and to be our own persons. A good leader seeks and assimilates inputs from the people around them, from the constituencies that they serve. But you must have the courage to stake out your position and to do what you believe is the right thing. I want to talk a little bit about optimism. We need to talk about optimism. For the 9-year period when I served as Lilly CEO, I met once or twice a year, along with a lot of other industry CEOs, with Bill Gates in the context of his leadership of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Bill understood correctly that the application of modern science is one of the biggest levers we have to improve global health. And it was during this period when I became aware of Bill's annual letter to the various stakeholders and the various groups connected to his foundation. Have you ever read one of these? They're all available online. I think if you just Google Bill Gates annual letter, you can go back as far as you want. I'll tell you, folks, I can't think of a better source for optimism in the face of headlines you read today that make you wonder, you know, is there anything to be optimistic about? Since the early 1990s, all these are all documented by Bill and others. Hundreds of millions of people on this planet, if not closer to billions, have been lifted out of extreme poverty. Polio has been virtually eradicated, and other dread communicable diseases have been much better controlled. Life expectancies have increased dramatically in many parts of the globe, and opportunities for education have become much more abundant. Would you ever know it? This is a quote from a recent Bill Gates letter. 20 years after starting our foundation, we're just as optimistic about the power of innovation to drive progress. Wow, what a statement. And kudos to Bill Gates and so many others for helping to make it happen. We've never needed optimism more than we do now. And I don't think this is about being a Pollyanna or Pollyanny-ish, if that's the word. You know, I think optimism, true optimism, is rooted in the firm conviction that ultimately we will get to a better place, that despite obstacles, we will succeed. The optimist can visualize what that looks like, and his or her demeanor reflects it. During those difficult years at Lilly, you can bet I walked the hallways with a smile on my face, at least most days, because I thought it was important. I knew it was important that others around me picked up on my demeanor and spirit and reflected that back to their own organizations. And lastly, I want to say a few words about generosity, and then we can move to I think some Q&A, Don. There's many stories told about Churchill, and I've stopped wondering which of those are true or not, but there's one that I like in particular. It was after the war had ended, and Churchill was in the habit of taking his holidays oftentimes on Italian luxury liners. And of course, this was the heyday of the British luxury liner industry, Cunard, etc. So some British reporter said to him, "Sir Winston, why is it when we have all of these great British luxury liners options that you insist on going on these Italian luxury liners?" And Churchill said, "Well, there's three reasons actually." He said, "The first is the food on these Italian ships is just without equal." And he said, "Secondly, the service is absolutely superb and unparalleled by any other cruise line or organization." And he said, "Finally, the Italians have none of this nonsense about women and children first." And so, you know, certainly women and children first, right? It's a form of generosity. It's generosity of the spirit, huh? But generosity, I think, as we more often think about it, entails generosity of our own time, being generous with our own time, with our own talent, and with our own financial resources. And I believe that generosity, like optimism, is contagious. When leaders are generous, others around them tend to be likewise. I mean, how many times have you said to yourself, well, if Joe or Sally is going to support this, so will I? I think a good recent example is how our community came together at the earliest stages of the COVID crisis back in March. You know, in short order, pretty much in March and April, the Central Indiana Community Economic Relief Fund, so-called CSERF, was formed, raised $23 million to help provide relief to the people most directly affected by the shutdown, made the last payout a short time ago, and I presume will go out of existence. Wow, I mean, what an effort, and what a token of, or what an indication of generosity of people in this community. My wife and I were pleased to support that effort, as were a good number of my former Lilly colleagues. And to me, never has the biblical quotation been so cogent: "To whom much is given, much will be required." And I think as we sit in our seats, many of us, most of us, fairly comfortably, we have to reflect on the many thousands and millions who are not so comfortable, for whom what lies ahead is not so certain, and draw from ourselves what's necessary to provide the moral and tangible support that so many of these folks need. But there's that other side of generosity, the women and children first side, which I call generosity of spirit. And I think that is so sorely needed today, particularly in the partisan atmosphere in which we live and amid the social unrest we're experiencing. I believe it's entirely possible to hold to one's convictions without at the same time convicting other people who might not think the way we do. This is, after all, the nature of civil discourse, and it's been sorely lacking of late. As we each try to sort things out for ourselves, for our families, for our churches, our schools, our businesses, I recall two quotations that have helped over the years keep me centered. The first is one I learned from one of my Lilly predecessors, Randy Tobias, who once told me wisely, there are always at least two sides to every story. And boy, has that helped me over the years. And the second quote is from Harper Lee's book, To Kill a Mockingbird, when Atticus Finch says to his daughter, Scout, you never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, until you climb into his skin and walk around in it. So there you have it. A few thoughts that I have to share with you, and I think I pretty well stayed on time amidst a strange and turbulent time that we're in, which cries out for leadership, for character, and for perseverance, as well as courage, optimism, and generosity. Thanks again for inviting me to share these comments. I hope they were of some value, and I'd be happy to take questions or engage further in conversation.
So everyone, we're going, and thank you very much, John. Lots and lots to think about there. It's nice that we're not in a corporate setting. It's a personal setting, and several of these folk obviously are your friends from many years at Lilly, in addition to others. But so everyone, if you'll submit your questions through chat, Jackson Troxel and my assistant Laura will be recording those, and then I'll be feeding those back to John instead of having everyone unmute, etc. So while they're doing that, John, if you wouldn't mind just giving us a 5 to 7 minute, just thumbnail where you came from, and maybe on those three, courage, optimism, generosity, maybe were there certain people in your life or certain things that that help form that in your life? You could mention you're a musketeer like me.
Well, I like to think to some degree we all stand on the shoulders of giants, right? And I think back, I'm the oldest of 9 children. I had a wonderful childhood and upbringing, and we had a 3-bedroom house for 11 people in Louisville, Kentucky, with no air conditioning. And but you never minded that during those years. Now you say, how did we do that? But I think generosity, my parents were very, very generous people. And I mean, whether it was my mother, collecting, going door to door, collecting for some organization, or, my father putting us through Catholic schools and paying the freight for that when money was hard to come by. There's no question. I learned that, you're just taught. I mean, if you have the wherewithal to help others who are not so fortunate as yourself, that's your duty, that's your obligation. To me, it's second nature. It's not something I even think about, but I have to look back and say, well, that must have come from, that experience of seeing that and living that. I've always been, I think, an optimist and upbeat. I think the experience at Lilly that we went through, the so-called YZ period, really tested that. There were ups and downs in that period. I think the thing that provided that source of optimism, energy, were all the good people that I was surrounded with. I mean, I just had this, after 30 plus years, I just felt like I had a sense of what Lilly people could do, and so that gave me the optimism. I just didn't think we could be beat. If we could marshal, and get hearts and minds pointed in the same direction. And courage, I don't know. I saw. We live in a condo in Indianapolis, and the fellow there puts different things in the elevator, and little sayings and stuff. And I saw at the beginning of the COVID crisis a little sign that said, fear is what. Fear is what you're feeling. Courage is what you're doing. And I think it's true. I mean, I think that circumstances dictate sometimes what you must do, and I think in times like this, we have to muster the resolve to do the right thing and to envision a future where we will have overcome COVID, where we will have a more just society, where we will regain low employment numbers. Things will be different, but maybe they can be different in a more positive way. I'm on this committee to revitalize downtown, and we were saying the other day, let's not think about taking downtown back to where it was. Let's think about how does downtown get better for everybody? Okay, how do we deal maybe with some of the festering issues that were there long before COVID hit, and we had the riots and the property damage and all this other stuff? How do we, how can we think about it actually being better and not just getting back to the status quo? So Don, those are a few thoughts.
Yeah, good. Thank you very much. So one question from the audience is, John, this comes from Mike Evans. Over the years, I and others have worked with you and have always been amazed at how you have personalized your relationships with handwritten letters and personal communications amidst a schedule that few could comprehend. Leading literally on a global scale, how have you structured your life to facilitate this life practice of generosity, and how did you establish this life practice?
Oh boy. Well, thanks for that question, Mike. For any of us, there's still only 24 hours in the day. And the biggest decision you make every day is how are you going to use that time, right? It's the most precious resource we have. I have to say, when I was at Lilly, I was careful about how far down in the weeds I got on anything. I did not read every paper that crossed my desk. I did not, get into the exacting details of every, financial investment, every da-da-da-da. You have to leave yourself some time to do the things that I think sometimes people would say, well, that's just a waste of time. But, without trying to over dramatize it, I mean, we faced a true, it's overused word, existential. We faced a true existential crisis starting in 2008, 2009. I mean, there were plenty out there that had us washed up and on the rocks, the company, okay? And you know, I felt at the time it was very important to keep morale high, and to do that. I tried to make it a practice to touch people personally, to visit laboratories, to walk through manufacturing, to talk to people in the hallways, to eat lunch in the cafeteria with people I had not met. And you know, those stories reverberate. I mean, they take on a life of their own, and you know, people start to see a more human face on a company that you know at the time faced some serious challenges. The handwritten thing is still very effective, by the way. I mean, how many of us don't appreciate getting in the good old U.S. Postal Service delivered mail a handwritten note thanking us for something we may have forgotten about, or sending us a birthday greeting or whatever. Part of the reason, Mike, I did that is because everything else is either voicemail or email. It's all kind of impersonal. But when you take 2 minutes to write a handwritten note to somebody, it gets their attention. And it was always interesting to me to see people would take those and stick them up in their cubicles, and you know, you'd see them something, you know, you'd written somebody a note 5 years before that you'd forgotten about, but they hadn't forgotten it. They had it hanging up there.
Okay, thank you. John, this question comes from Dave Neff and says, what do you see as the greatest opportunities in the city's future as you look out over the next 25 years?
I think there's a lot of opportunities for the city. I think that I think we have to remain very serious about economic development in a you know, what you might call the new or the emerging economy. I've been pleased to see the amount of high tech and digital e-commerce kinds of jobs opening up in Indianapolis. There's Salesforce kind of led the charge, but there's a lot more going on besides. I remain involved in helping try to grow the life sciences in central Indiana. It's still a huge economic driver for the state, but we're competing obviously against both coasts and Europe and Asia and everywhere else for that, for those kinds of jobs. Economic development is so important, but no more important than education. And I think that you know, when we talk about equity and inequity, we have to be determined as a society that we're going to give every child an opportunity for a quality education. That just isn't the case today. And you know, fortunately, Indiana has a voucher system and in my mind, a fairly progressive approach to trying to enable more choices on the part of people who want to provide that opportunity for their children. But you know, if you're not reading at third grade level or sixth grade level, and you're not prepared for high school, and then you're not able to keep up with high school work and you drop out, you know, I don't care if you're Hispanic, if you're African American, if you're white, that's not going to work for you. I mean, we can predict, you know, what's life going to look like for you without that high school degree, and probably going forward at least some post-secondary work. So Sarah and I have talked a lot about this. And by the way, I view this not as I view it as an opportunity for Indianapolis to have a better educated citizenry. And I think a lot of our own personal philanthropy is going to continue to go to childhood education alternatives, so that we give as many kids in our community the best possible chance at a great education. And nobody knows this better than Fred Yakey. You happen to be on my screen here, Fred, and I know that this is the essence of what you guys are trying to do at Providence Crystal Ray, but there are a lot of other great efforts underway in the community as well. I think looking at things from another angle, I think building up higher residential density in downtown is going to be important. I read an article the other day, as much as we think there are more people living downtown, there's only 10,000 more people living downtown today than there were in the 70s, according to one source. So, I think to have a vibrant city center, which I think is so important for the whole surrounding community, I think creating more residential options, and that means creating more education options for people who want to live downtown with young families, for example, and also creating enough diversity of housing, so it's not just somebody moving into a gentrified neighborhood who's living downtown, but it's a downtown that accommodates in many cases the people who work there, who now have long commutes to get to service jobs, for example. I think there's got to be a broader spectrum of opportunity for living down there. But I'm very optimistic about our future here. I really am. And as much as, I talk about downtown, and we've got some wonderful surrounding suburbs. We've got a low cost of living here. We've got surrounding us wonderful, institutions of higher education. We've got some real strengths to build on.
Yeah.
And I think that we've got to be resolute about taking what looks like a crisis now and using it to build something better.
A couple questions come up, one from David Morgan and Phil Lofton as it relates to generosity. It says, how have you and Sarah prioritized your personal priorities for generosity in the midst of so many needs and requests? Have you stepped up and given more than you were comfortable? And have you ever regretted it? Why or why not? And then the other part of the generosity questions was, what do you see as the most important opportunities for generosity in Indianapolis as we start to see some of the longer term effects of the pandemic, both in terms of generosity of finance and generosity of spirit?
Well, those are some good questions. Sarah and I have, well, it's interesting, starting about a year ago or 18 months ago, we started to talk about how do we begin to focus more on maybe fewer projects or fewer institutions or giving opportunities, as opposed to spreading ourselves across so many. I mean, we support so many institutions in Indianapolis we're all familiar with, and they're great, but should we not pick one or two areas of focus and maybe do a 60-40 or a 70-30, where 70% of our time and talent and treasure would be focused on a few things and the other 30% would be others. Well, we were just I had a whole series of, I was going to meet with Ann Mertlow at United Way, with Rob Smith at the endowment, with Brian Payne at CICF. I had a half dozen or so meetings set up to just bounce around with different people in the community who see the community in a broader sense than we do, and try to get an idea from them what would be not only the right areas to focus on, but what would be the right way to make those investments, right? I mean, how do you, if you say you want to move the needle here on this topic or that topic, how you do that? I mean, do you give to this organization or that organization? Do you start something new? Well, COVID interrupted that process, and we're trying to get rescheduled with some of those folks so that if we can't meet in person, we'll do a Zoom call. But our thinking currently is education, kind of pre-K to 12, and and mental health. We've been really struck by the paucity of resources here to help people with serious mental illness. And those of you at Lilly know that, you know, the advent of Prozac revolutionized the treatment of mental illness and the recognition. It brought mental illness out of the closet to some degree, but today I'm afraid I see too many instances where there just aren't the resources available to help a teen who's struggling, to help a homeless person who's fighting mental illness. So I don't know exactly where we're going there yet. Our friends, Bob Postlewaite from Lilly and Mike Smith and others have been involved in this area. And I think if I had to pick two areas today where we probably focus our generosity, be there. But we're also big fans of art and culture. And you know, I think these, particularly the performing arts, Sarah's on the board of IRT, and the performing arts are just suffering interminably here. A lot of these little theaters are going to go out of business. Not IRT, but I think that, you know, this is putting a huge dent in their ability to, in some cases, even survive. So I think that's probably a third area: arts and culture, because I think we're all lifted up. You know, arts and culture are not just for the 1%. I think arts and culture, you know, give our community life and vitality and character and ambition. And I think there are doors that are open to everybody. And when it comes to arts and culture, and I think that's something we'll probably focus on. Your other question was, have we ever given so much that it hurt? Well, that's a good question. I got to think about that.
Okay.
Well, you know, I guess we've many years ago set up a family foundation, and that's been a good thing for us because it's allowed us to bring our 3 children into the process of thinking about generosity, and you know, hopefully someday they'll you know, control that foundation and continue to do good work there. But no, I've never regretted a single gift we've made. You know, it gives both of us tremendous satisfaction to know that the organizations we support do good work, that we can help them make a difference, that we can help them in the present circumstance, you know, weather the storm of COVID and all these other things going on, and you know, emerge out of this stronger and better.
Okay.
In terms of opportunities for generosity, gosh, I think they're legion, and it's really hard to sit back and say that, you know, there aren't 1,500 worthwhile organizations supporting, but you know, I would you know, I would ask you to think about, as each of you have your own causes and your own things that you support, you know, your churches, the United Way, you know, whatever that is, you know, is there a way to focus your efforts and your giving such that it really aligns with, you know, what you view your purpose being, what you view, you know, the right thing for you and your families. I don't know how to answer that other than.
Yeah, no, that's good. A question from Jackson Troxel is, when you reflect on your leadership career, is there a keystone life habit that changed the trajectory, and when was it formed?
Say that again, Don. It was
it says, when you reflect on your leadership career, is there a keystone habit that changed the trajectory, I guess, of your leadership or your career, and when was that formed?
Yeah, I don't know a keystone habit.
Okay.
Well, I mean, Look, I think, I joined Lilly as a chemist working at the bench in 1979. So I needed a job, by the way. 1979 was not a real good moment in the economy. And I had a newborn son and wife, and we didn't have 2 dimes to rub together, and we got to Indianapolis. So my main interest was landing a job after graduate school. I couldn't have told you who the CEO of Lilly was at the time, probably. I mean, I had no ambition to do anything other than be a bench chemist. And that's what I did for a few years. And then other opportunities opened up. I think probably the most important thing I would say that I talk to a lot of younger people at Lilly about is just continuing to grow as a leader. And I did this through kind of a series of experiences with other leaders. For the most part, I learned positive traits and behaviors. And there were a couple instances where I would say, well, I don't want to be like that, or I don't want to act like that. I would take lessons, in the opposite direction. But 10 years before I became CEO of Lilly, I was not prepared to be CEO of Lilly. I'm not sure I was prepared to be CEO of Lilly when I got the job in 2008. But I think that, many of us would have had the experience of growing into these jobs based on a willingness to learn and absorb, and to not be set back by failure to the extent that you were afraid to move forward and do the next thing. And I also, I think there's something to be said for hard work. I mean, that sounds crazy, but there weren't too many people that got into Eli Lilly and Company in the morning before me. I worked my tail off, and I enjoyed it. I mean, I was lucky to have the kind of job that I did, but I've just seen too many times. It's not the smartest person in the room. It's oftentimes the person who's willing to roll up their sleeve and do the work and do what was necessary. And that last day I worked at Lilly in December of 2016, I was there at 5:45, and I had some stuff to do. So it's sometimes there's no magic formula. But I think that hard work and application. I was saying to Sarah the other night, I mean, you hope you leave with your kids something that they can carry forward, and you look back and say, well, I taught them that, or your students, if you're a teacher or whatever. But, I think each of our 3 children get up in the morning and go, I got to get out there today and earn it. I mean, I've got to show up. I've got to be part of the solution. I'm not here, to be waited on. I'm here to help others. I'm here to do stuff and make things happen, and to have that sense of urgency about it. I guess that's a good thing, and I think they got it from us. But if that's all they've taken, they probably got enough to get them through to some stage.
Yeah. So maybe we'd take a little break here, and we, as we talked about before, and have Dr. Franson. The question has come in: what's your confidence in the COVID-19 vaccine, and what's underway that will produce significant benefit to patients in the long term? So maybe just a little briefing, Tim. Tim was the head of regulatory affairs for Eli Lilly for many years, was Greg's boss for several years. So Tim kind of works in this field.
Sure. Thanks, Don. Happy to comment a bit. I'm now a consultant with Faegre Drinker, which many of you remember as Baker and Daniels and then Faegre Baker Daniels. We work a lot with a variety of development firms as well as with policy. And when you think about vaccines or really any pharmaceutical development, I like to think there are parallels with natural processes. You can have a baby in 7 months, but it doesn't always turn out as you would like. So that the concerns here are, what are the basic minimums that you need to show both safety and efficacy? And you cannot cut corners too sharply in these kind of things. As a frame of reference, the fastest vaccine ever developed up to now took 4 years, and it was a measles follow-on vaccine. So it wasn't first time everything for a given organism. We're talking now about a new virus, and we're also talking about some of the companies using new platforms that have never been used to develop vaccine for humans. And that's the new messenger RNA platform. Several of the companies, Moderna and Pfizer and so forth, are pursuing that. Anytime you walk down a new pathway, the concern is that we don't know a lot of the unintended consequences. And so you need a period of time to observe after a vaccination, whether you got the effect you desired, but also are you looking at for any unintended effects. So I think we all need to be cautious in thinking about how long would it be after these trials that we would feel comfortable in saying, I want my grandkids to be able to have this. I think I'll stop there. There are many of you I see the faces on here who have strong interests and expertise. So I'd be interested in others.
And I think that John maybe alluded to, or maybe Tim, you could address in prior to our pre-conference, just what Lilly's doing and how that fits in.
Sure, I guess I would, being 12 years out now, I'm probably not the appropriate voice for that, but I certainly saw what Lilly did in terms of testing, but also now in terms of antibody production that is very exciting and is a much more reasonable, shorter term strategy than for a vaccine. John, I'd defer to you on that.
Yeah, I mean, I know what I've read, and I think Lilly was the first in to advanced human studies with a monoclonal antibody that would be administered presumably to people who either tested positive or experiencing symptoms and could lessen those symptoms and hopefully have a positive impact on the disease, keeping it from getting any more serious. I'm also interested, Tim, just to see, you would know much more about this than I, but it seems like just looking at treatment protocols, we've learned a lot, apparently. The medical profession's learned a lot about treating COVID in the last 6 months, and it seems like that's reflected in the maybe the lower mortality rate. I might be reading too much into the data, but we heard a lot about ventilators and respirators, for example, back in March. And now, we're hearing that, well, you really don't want to put so many patients on those, that it's earlier treatments that are helping lessen the severity. What can you say about that?
Sure. I mean, it's an exciting time in a lot of areas, and we're learning more with every passing day. I think one of the reasons we're seeing the decline in mortality are related to exactly what you said, learning more about how better to manage the severe cases. And dexamethasone, a corticosteroid type drug, appears to have clear beneficial effects. I think the other reason we're seeing falling death rates is because the denominator of younger, healthier people who are getting exposed to the illness, who don't end up getting the most severe manifestations, helps us balance out the numbers. And a lot of the disease was centered in the elderly with chronic diseases. I mean, it just flew through nursing homes and so forth. I think one other comment would be is we have to be very cautious in how we look at how the regulators and others are demanding the appropriate information. You'll see in the media today a huge controversy about the approval of convalescent plasma. So taking blood and spinning off the necessary components there to help defend. Does that really have sufficient proofs? And without getting into political things here, I think it's always important that we allow science to always counterbalance political urgencies. And that's going to be something important for all of us to watch.
All right, thank you. I got two final questions. One from Greg Enos, since he can't be here, he wanted to know, John, how important a role does faith play in this time of uncertainty and loss of hope? And what are those things that you are hanging on to keep you going?
Oh, I think faith plays an enormous role. I know, we're still, there were 6 weeks or so, I wasn't counting, 6 or 7 weeks when our church was closed. And fortunately, we were able to to access or to gain access to the services online. Thank heavens for technology. But I felt absolutely dispossessed during that time. I mean, it was strange to not be connected with our church community. And of course, now it's social distancing and all the precautions that have to be taken. There's while there's an opportunity to attend services, we're being advised by, our Archbishop, basically, if you're over 65, continue to watch online. It's probably safer that way than coming to church. So it's a strange, this has compounded what's already been a strange time. But I think that, it's like I was saying before, this epidemic, this pandemic, and all the surrounding events, I think have sort of laid things bare. And I think it's been a good time for us. And I have to say, the isolation down here in Brown County, this is almost like being on a spiritual retreat. It's been a good time for us to reflect. And I've been reading more religious focused material, thinking a little bit more about things that maybe you could say I didn't have time, to think about before. But now, as I say, it's almost like, for a period of time, the world stopped, and you had to just sit there and reflect. What is there? What am I all about? Where's my faith rooted? Yeah. And it was very sweet. We had for 4 or 5 weeks, we had 6 of our grandchildren and parents staying with us down here back in the early days, and my daughter and her 3 kids continued and stayed on here into the summer. And I have a little 2-year-old, not yet 2-year-old granddaughter, our youngest granddaughter, Demerly Grace. And every time we sat down for dinner here, she put both her hands out and she'd say, "I want to pay. I want to pay." Okay. And we'd have to say grace before dinner, everybody holding hands. At the end of that, when that was over, she went, "Yay, let's eat." Okay. But I thought, isn't this kind of cool that the youngest one among us, because she learned that habit based on our being confined in a way we never thought we would, is reminding us all to be grateful for what we have and to join together in prayer. I'll never forget that. It's very neat. Let the children lead them, right?
Yes. And finally, are there 1 or 2 books that you'd recommend people on this call that have either challenged your thinking or and just been edifying to you?
Well, a friend of mine, Sir Win Bischoff, who retired from the Lilly board several years ago, he lives in London. And out of the blue, he said, "I need a good book. I need to know a good biography of Abraham Lincoln." And I said, I've known the former president of Harvard for many years. Her name's Drew Faust. She just stepped down last year. Drew is a Lincoln scholar, Civil War scholar. So I sent Drew an email out of the blue and I said, give me what's a good biography of Lincoln? And she recommended one written, I think it's by Ron White, about 10 years ago, and it's called just A. Lincoln. And I realized how little I knew about Lincoln. And, you know, here, I grew up in Kentucky and I live in Indiana. Hell, I'm following his footsteps. But I really, that book was awesome to read. I like biographies, if you can't tell. And the other one, I think, is the book now out, Andrew Roberts' book on Churchill. Not just because of the biography of Churchill, but because of the whole sweep of events. I mean, Churchill was a Victorian and Edwardian. I mean, this is a man who seemed to live forever, and it captures a big slice of history. So those are two that I've really enjoyed reading.
John, thank you very much. This has been just delightful, and so grateful for you taking the time.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me, folks. I really appreciate it. Quite an honor.
Pete, you want to make a couple announcements there in our upcoming?
Yeah. So first, John, again, I just want to echo Don's comments. Thank you very much for being with us today. Tim Franson as well. Really appreciate the intro. And I just am honored to have been able to work with you guys in the past. And it's neat to see both of you again. So, hey, I wanted to make you guys aware. I'm Pete Watson, and I actually serve with Don and Greg and Jackson as part of the C7 leadership team. And I wanted to make you aware of a couple upcoming events that just for now to mark your calendars, and you'll see more promotion coming in the weeks ahead. The first event is on September 22nd from 4:30 to 6. And we're actually going to be sponsoring a virtual tour. Some of you may remember we did a bus tour of the inner city back, particularly on the east side, back, I think it was 2 years ago. And obviously with COVID and all the restrictions around that, we can't kind of do that same event. So we're trying to kind of create that same sense of a tour of the city and some key ministries. We'll actually be seeing 3 different ministries: Heart Change Ministries, Purposeful Design, as well as Shepherd Community Center. And so those will be highlighted through a series of videos, and you'll be invited to participate in one form or another. So look for an invite, again, September 22nd from 4:30 to 6. The other event, and this is still in the formation stage, but I believe it will be on October 6th with a gentleman, Jeff Spatafora. Jeff was formerly with the Halftime Institute and now runs a ministry called The Way. And he also is author of The Joy Model. He'll be joining us for a similar session like today on October 6th. And that will probably be at that 11:45 time frame. And sorry, my landline just started ringing.
Someone this call might not know what a landline is, so Pete. Okay, well, I hope you all have enjoyed this. Fred Yakey is the head of school. I don't know what your exact title is, Fred, of Providence Cristo Del Rey, which is just a few blocks from George Washington High School. An absolutely amazing story. I got to know Sister Jean a little. You probably weren't around when Sister Jean was there, but she's
legendary.
I would go to school there for Sister Jean. But Fred, if you could close us in a word of prayer.
Absolutely. I just want to tell John, I'm sure that you hear this a lot, but just thank you for sharing in so many words of testimony, right? What God has allowed you to go through and experience just for the well-being of others. And I also want to thank Citizen 7 just for allowing this platform. And so many times when you can't come together as a body of believers and just come together and connect, it's great that God gave us a platform that kind of reminds me of the Holy Spirit, right? We can see each other, but even though we're not connected, we feel it. So I just want to end just with the word of prayer. This morning, I was reading the word of God as I come into work, driving to school. I have a young child, a son, 8 months old, and 2 kids. And after I drop them off, I'm constantly praying so I can get ready to minister in the spirit of education. And I was letting the Bible app read to me. And it's pretty cool because it's a British accent. So I feel like it's really God talking to me, right? So St. John, the first chapter, and it opened up like, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. But what stuck out to me, I read that scripture so many times, the Word was with God. And as we are in this season, and as John hit on, really the great thing that really popped out to me was time is our most precious commodity. I just want you guys to know that time does not matter to God because the Word is with God. And what we need right now in this spirit, or in the time frame that we're in, is not fear, but it's faith, it's peace. And it's the reality to know that at the end of the day, we are called to do one great thing, and that's to fulfill His Word. So I'm just going to pray this prayer blessing over everyone here lives. And I also want to pray for a blessing over John as he continues to do the things that God has commissioned him to do. So if you can still yourself, and as we come into the presence of God. Jesus, we thank you for allowing us to come together and to connect on one word, and that's your Word of God. We thank you for the power and the love, the transparency, but more importantly, we just thank you for the opportunity to come. During this season where the world is going a lot of places, we're constantly reminded that nothing happens without your will. And even as you spoke to the storm, before you walked on water, we ask that you to speak to our hearts and just with the word of peace, still us. Remember us individually in our professional endeavors. We are called to do things, even though our job may do something else. Our work is still what calls us and drives us. God, let us work while it's yet day. Anoint our hands that whatever we touch is anointed to grow. Anoint our tongue that whatever we say can speak life. Give us the eyes that you see. Give us the vision that you have empowered us to be. But more importantly, God, creating us a clean heart, renewing us a right spirit. God, we thank you for John being here. You have anointed him and you have given him grace to do your will. I ask a special blessing for him and his family. Although he's in Brown County, God, his reach goes beyond Indiana. God, equipped him, hold up his hands as you did with Moses as he was fighting. And more importantly, God, allow his heart to continue to be a resemblance of you. And we ask all these wonderful things in the precious name of Jesus. Amen and amen. Thank you.
Thank you all. And thank you, Fred. May everyone have a great week.